Hello everyone, in this episode we're going to be focusing on CSS properties and their values as well as property declarations. By the end of this episode our game will look like this and you will learn how to style your own game in a similar manner. Before we begin, I just wanted to say that only 10% of you who watch my tutorials are subscribed, so if you are interested in Idle Game Maker and wish to learn more, why not subscribe? It would make me really happy and it's one of the best ways to support me. With that said, let's begin learning about properties. So first of all, a property in CSS determines an HTML element's style or behavior. And property declarations, they sound really scary, but you've already seen them numerous times throughout this course. They are just the key and value pair of a CSS property and its value. And their syntax is actually really simple, it's just the property combined with its value. And this is the key value pair that we are talking about, right? The property is the key and the value is the value. And they are used to set properties and construct rules to apply to individual or groups of HTML elements with selectors, which we've covered in the last episode. You also mustn't forget that a semicolon must always be at the end of a property declaration. This is because otherwise the CSS will not be applied, and it's especially important due to the fact that Idle Game Maker does not throw any errors when working with CSS, so you may get stuck trying to figure out what's wrong with your CSS code, only to find out that a single semicolon was the problem all along. Believe me, I've had that happen many times. So just don't forget about the semicolon. Next up, let's take apart this scary looking diagram that I created, and you might have noticed it already, but this is just the code for the upgrade class, which we modified in the last episode to style our upgrades. So first of all, we have the selector here, in our case a class, followed by curly brackets, and this is just normal selector syntax, which we learned in the last video. But next is where our property declaration begins. Here we can notice the key and value pair of a CSS property and its value. In this case we use the background property followed by a colon, right? You always need to put a colon after a property in CSS, otherwise it won't work. And after the colon we have our value, and as a little heads up, different properties accept different values, right? In this case the background property accepts color values, so we have assigned it a value of a dark goldenrod, and this now marks the end of our property declaration, so we must put a semicolon at the end of it. And the second property declaration with this color property here is just the same thing. And really, that's all there is to property declarations. And congratulations, because you have now laid the foundations for yourself for coding with CSS. Of course, there is still lots to learn, but at this point, CSS is mainly just learning about the tons of different properties that you can use, their unique behaviors, along with their unique values. And for that, the CSS reference site, which is linked in the description as well, it's this one right here, will definitely help you, as it contains all of the usable properties in CSS, and we'll be talking about a few of these in future episodes as well. But of course, we won't be covering all of them, and that's where you'll have to do a little bit of digging yourself as to how they can be used. And my advice for you is that you can read about any of these properties in detail by just clicking on them. For example, let's take a look at the border property, and they even have a very useful try it yourself option where you can experiment with the property to see what it does more clearly, right? So here we can see that it sets the style of the borders for different elements. So let's click on try it yourself, and let's try changing the border style in here to be dotted instead of solid, right? We can see that it has changed successfully. Maybe we can experiment with changing the size, and so we can really experiment here and learn a lot about each property. Now, one more thing I want to tell you about is that you may come across a special type of property called a shorthand property. And shorthand properties are properties that let you set the values of multiple other CSS properties simultaneously. This means that they are very useful for saving a lot of your valuable time, but they also make your style sheets a lot more readable. And an example of a shorthand property is the border property, which we examined a minute ago, with which you can set three properties at the same time. That is the border width, border style, as well as the border color property. This just means that the code you see here is a shortened, more readable version of this code right here. You can see that they produce the exact same result. In the first position we set the border width, in the second position we set the border style, and in the third value position we set border color. There are tons of shorthand properties in CSS, but they all work in the exact same way. A different property's value is set based on the position of the value. Alright, and with what we have learned, let's now style our game. I'm going to move pretty quickly here, so if you get lost, feel free to rewind. However, I'll do my best to explain what I'm doing as we go. So feel free to code along with me, or just sit back and relax. So we got this nice golden theme going on with our buildings and upgrades, so I'll style everything else accordingly. And the first thing I like to style is our headers. So let's right click our headers and click inspect element. and we can see that our headers use the .box header class. I'm gonna edit the headers directly using the inspect element window to actually see what I'm doing, but at the end I'm gonna copy and paste the changes I've made here into our style sheet in Notepad++. So let's add some fitting golden colors to them using the background color property, and I think a value of goldenrod would work nicely here to make it brighter than our variables, which I think creates a nice feel. Alright, so that looks pretty good, but I think what will really make the headers pop, so to speak, is some kind of border. So let's use the border shorthand property. First position is of course the width, so let's set that to 3 pixels. Second position is the style of the border. Set that to solid, I think looks nice in this case. And the third position is the color of the border. I think pale goldenrod looks nice here. We could stop here as I think it already looks decent, but let's go a step further and let's also enlarge the text, right? So let's change the font size properties value from 15 pixels to 20 pixels. I think looks good. And to really elevate the headers, let's also add a white glow to the text. This is easily done with the text shadow property, which is once again a shorthand property, where in the first value position you set the X offset of the shadow and want this to be 0 pixels, since I don't want any offset whatsoever. In the second value position you set the Y offset of the shadow, and same as with the X offset, I don't want it, so I'm just going to set that to 0 pixels as well. Then in the third position you set the blur radius of the shadow, which we'll set to 10 pixels, and in the fourth one you set the color, which we want to be white. Love the way this looks, but I feel it's missing one last thing to really finalize the look of our headers, and that is a box shadow to the headers themselves. This can be achieved using the box shadow property, which once again is another shorthand property. We're using those a lot in this episode, aren't we? But it's pretty much the same as with the text shadow property, where the first position is the X offset of the shadow, second position is the Y offset of the shadow, which in this case I want it to actually be 2 pixels. Then the third value position is the blur radius of the shadow, which I want to be 25 pixels. And the fourth value position is the color of the shadow, which I want to be black. And with some simple CSS, our headers look a lot more alive and fit a lot more with the theme of our game. Now we are going to need to actually save these changes, because if we were to refresh the game right now, all the changes we made would be lost. So let's copy this entire class and paste it into our Notepad++ style sheet. Now after we saved our changes, we can see that the changes we made are now permanent. However, one thing I'm noticing is that the font size didn't actually get saved, and the reason why is actually because I forgot about one crucial thing. And this is a very informative moment for you as well, because the thing I forgot about is that several months ago in one of my Idle Game Maker tutorial videos, we've changed the box header class already. I believe it was to fix a bug or something. And this has overridden the font size which we have set right now. And this is something you should watch out for as well. That is, if you have multiple instances of a class inside your code, the properties inside the one you declared earlier will override the properties of the one you declared later. Knowing this will save you a lot of headache in the future. So a simple way to fix this is to just remove this other class altogether and move its properties to the class we have created right now. So I deleted the font size property since we don't need that one. I'll just copy these properties, then I'll delete the entire class. I'll scroll up to find the class which we created right now. Yep. And we can now paste the properties of that other one inside of this one. And now if we save our changes, font size should carry over without any issues. Yep, that seems to have fixed the issue, and the font size is now the proper 20 pixels. So the next thing I want to style is our two little buttons here, with which you can choose whether to show available or owned upgrades. So as with the headers, let's right click them and click inspect element. Let's resize this window a little bit so we can see it better. And these buttons actually use a custom class which I assigned to them when we were creating them in episode 21 of the Idle Game Maker course. So first things first, let's give them a background color of dark goldenrod. All the clickable things in my game have that color too. Let's give them a border. So a border that's 3 pixels wide, has a dashed style, and has a color of pale goldenrod to make them fit in with our headers. Or actually, on second thought, I think maybe if the border had a width of 2 pixels, it would look a lot nicer. There we go. Now before we do anything else, let's save our changes by copying them into our style sheet in Notepad++. So let's hit copy on these changes which we made, and let's paste them inside of the upgrade switch class like this. Alright, great. Now I've saved my changes to File Garden, once again making them permanent. Now I actually love this dashed border a lot because it seems like a cool visual way to communicate to the player that an element can be clicked. So let's add the exact same dashed border to each thing in our game which can be clicked. That is, we'll need to add it to our buildings and our upgrades, but also our resource. And for the sake of doing it quicker, let's just copy and paste the border property to both our buildings and our upgrades. So here's the upgrade class, let's add the border property to it, and in the buildings, here we go, dot building, let's add the border property here as well. And in order to style the resource, that's done using the .res class. So let's create it here since it's not included inside of the Big Blue style sheet. Let's add the border here as well, but also we want to add a background color of dark goldenrod since we've kind of got this theme going where our clickable things have a background color of dark goldenrod. And there we go, now all the clickable things in our game have a finalized look, which I think looks really, really cool. And if you're wondering how I figured out that the res class is used by the resources, I found it out in the exact same way that I showed you in the last episode, where you simply right-click the element that you want to style and then click inspect element, and usually you'll find out that the element has some kind of unique class, right? In the case of the resources, they have the res class, which can be seen here. And with that, we are almost done. The one last thing we'll need to do style is this little guy right here. However, this box in particular is a bit of a troublemaker. And what do I mean by this? Well, let's try styling it, right? So let's right-click it and click inspect element. We can see that it uses the box bit class. So let's try changing the border radius. Let's, for example, change it to 20. And you'll quickly realize that we have a problem, right? Changing this class changes the look of our log as well, right? So you can see that the border radius of this box has changed, but so has the radius of our log. And this is a very common problem that you will definitely come across as well. A quick explanation on why this happens is because the log, for some reason, automatically has the box bit class attached as well. We can see that by opening it here. We can see that here that it has the box bit class attached. And this is a prime example of when it is clearly better to style something using its identifier instead of a class. Because, and this is very important, the identifier of an element overrides any styling properties that have been set by a class attached to that element. This means that we are going to need to style the bulk display box using its identifier of hashtag bulk display, right? So this identifier right here. So first let's add a background color to it of goldenrod to make it the same color as our header here. Then let's give it a border radius of 20 pixels, and what this property does is it rounds the edges of the bulk display box. Then let's add a border of a width of 2 pixels, have it be a style of solid and a color of pale goldenrod. And I think it would look the best if it didn't cast any shadow, so let's have the box shadow be set to none. And there we go. Since we styled the bulk display box using its unique identifier and not the box bit class, that means the log didn't get affected by the changes we made. Now all that is left to do is copy the changes into our style sheet in Notepad++ to make them permanent. So I'm just simply gonna paste it in here, and now when we save our changes using File Garden, this episode can finally come to a close. Alright, and with that, we are finally done with this episode. There was tons of information in this one that will definitely help you in your CSS journey. Hopefully you didn't just blindly copy what I have done, since that wasn't entirely the point of this video. The point was to show you the problem-solving process and the mindset that comes with styling your game. Hopefully you have picked up at least some of it, and I believe by this point you should be able to style your game at least somewhat to your liking. In the next few episodes we will cover pseudo classes, positioning, inheritance and all that fun stuff, so make sure to subscribe so you don't miss it. If you have any questions or feel confused about anything, feel free to ask in the comments. I'll be answering every single one. And if you really enjoy what I do here, you can check out my Patreon, where for only $2 a month you can have your name displayed in the outro of my videos. But with that said, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.